morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, LinkedIn Live. It's Friday. If you're watching this live, welcome if you're watching this on replay, because I'm conscious that not everybody is free on a Friday morning in the UK at 8:30. So good morning. Hope you've all had a good week. So today, what am I talking about? How to set diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging targets. And the reason for this is because it is something that I am often asked about by clients, but also this week I was asked to contribute to an article talking about this particular topic. So, how to set, I was asked to comment on how to set diversity and inclusion targets specifically, but I thought I'd broaden this out into diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging targets, how to set good targets. So, I'm going to kind of whistle through that. I'm going to take about 20 minutes this morning. So, trying to keep it short and snappy because I know that people have got a lot of things to do. So what I'm going to cover this morning is how to set these goals strategically so that they aren't just like a thing, a one-off initiative over here that has no bearing on the rest of the organization. So what are your strategic goals and how do you make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging supports those? How do you get to the root causes of what it is that's going on, what's going wrong, why you're not kind of feeling like you're hitting where you should be, because that is part of knowing what your targets need to be. Then we're going to look at the employee pipeline, which is really important in terms of certainly around sort of like diversity and also a measure of inclusion and belonging, actually. So, what does the pipeline look like and when do we lose various members of our workforce? And then return on investment. So, really getting into the outputs and the outcomes and some of the measures that come as a result of having a really diverse workforce that is really engaged and happy and feeling like they belong. And then finally, something that's not often talked about, but the backlash against setting diversity targets. One of the things I'm often asked is what are my views on quotas? And I will go into that and I'll talk about what you can get in terms of backlash. So let's get into this. Let's start with the strategic goals and why do you even want to set diversity and inclusion targets? And it's always a really good place to start. Why do you even want to set those? I've included down at the bottom there, so if you're based in the UK, and I know obviously there are similar regulations coming into play in the US as well and other countries, but there is, in terms of why organizations are doing this, there is increased regulation around having diverse boards in particular. So if we start just at the top level, because it's kind of tends to be easier to measure. In the UK, the FTSE 350, so the largest 350 public companies are being asked to comply or explain their gender diversity on boards and also the diversity in terms of ethnic minority representation. And so that's the FTSE 350 in terms of gender, so having at least 40% of women on boards, but also something called the Parker Review. If you're not aware of it, the Parker Review is a report that came out in March of this year and that has mandated ethnic minority representation at a board level, but also at an executive management level, so kind of one level below, sort of like the public board. And again, that is for the FTSE 350, but also for the 50 private companies to hit these targets by 2027 as well. So there are these regulatory pressures, right, as well as the business rationale for setting targets. But I've sort of broken it down into these four areas. So first of all, you have the moral case. The moral case is kind of doing the right thing. Okay, because doing the right thing, it's just kind of the right thing to do, particularly in the communities that you serve, the communities that you're based in, if you have physical locations. And my advice in terms of setting targets that links into doing the right thing is looking at the communities where you are based, where your locations are. Does your workforce represent, is it a good representation of the communities in which you are located? And so a really easy way of setting those targets is just looking at your census data. So what does the census tell you is the composition of the areas that you're located in? And actually that's kind of a pretty good way of just sort of like setting that first target to say, I want my workforce to look like the area in which I'm based, right? Especially if you're physical location, the staff aren't all remote, etc. That's a really easy way of setting a target. Second one is around the business case. So actually, what are the business drivers? Why are you wanting to have more diversity, inclusion, etc.? We know that inclusion and belonging and equity, so a sense of fairness, is all around employees feeling happy and doing their best work. So that's kind of like a no-brainer from a business case perspective in terms of, why you should want things like employee engagement, regardless of employee background, to be high. But there also is this business case around diversity, and this is something that I talk to clients about a lot, around things like innovation, creativity, better problem solving, etc. All of those things drive the desire for having more diversity. So things like, do you want to have more creative products and services? Do you want to go into the next one? Do you want to kind of match the customer? So do you want to match the makeup of your customers so that you better understand what it is that your customers need? And that can be a driver. So you could set a goal around matching the demographic of your target customers. If your customers are B2B, then maybe you want to go to your customers, so the end consumer. Do you want to potentially match the profile of the end consumer? And obviously, in terms of employees, what does the workforce need to look like, and what levels of inclusion and belonging do you want to aim for? So do you want to be an upper quartile organization? Do you want to be a best company to work for? Do you want to be a B Corp? That's something that's quite sort of like popular. So there are all sorts of like goals and external targets and things like that that you can use to help you set these internal targets. But before you go ahead setting the targets, and the targets is about what are we trying to achieve, what's the vision, what are we going for? I always say you want a root cause why you're not already there. Why is it that you're not there? Why is it that you're wanting to do this? And I've got at the bottom, and I've sort of been asking why, but the 5 whys. So kind of keep asking why. So why have we not got the diversity, and trying to really get under the skin of, so for example, if you feel like you're not diverse, why are we not diverse? If you're not diverse at certain levels, why are we not diverse at certain levels? And I'll come into that on the next slide. But really getting into the why. If it's around inclusion and sense of belonging and things like that, again, really getting into the data. You will have survey data. So most organizations are already doing employee engagement surveys. If you have been collecting any sort of like demographics data, so whether that be gender, age, ethnicity, disabilities, whatever it be, and you can, mine that data, you might already have quite a bit of insight in your survey data around who is and who isn't feeling happy and engaged. So that's one place to go to try to get to the root cause in terms of, is there a specific group that isn't feeling engaged? And some of the questions to look at in terms of your existing survey data is things like, I can come to work and be myself, is a really obvious one in terms of things like inclusion, sense of belonging, but also things like, I feel that I have sufficient opportunities to progress within this organization. Again, if when you cut that by different demographics, you're getting different views. So maybe you're getting, all of the women are saying, this is great, everything's really fair and equitable. And then you maybe get all of the men saying, no, something's not working. That you've maybe got an issue within the different demographics. Things like how is poor performance managed? Again, if you look at that cut by demographic, you might start to see some patterns. So either using the survey data that you have, if it has gone down to enough detail, or getting in an external organisation to come in and help you shape a survey or run a survey for you is useful. But you're looking for things like, do individuals feel included? Do they feel like they can be themselves? Can they progress in the organisation? Do they feel that things are fair, right? Do they feel that there is equity and equality in that organisation? And so look through the questions that you're already asking to see whether you can get an indication of that split down by different demographics. And then I'd also suggest some focus groups. So don't just rely on the hard data. Run some focus groups. Either do that internally, if you feel that you've got the skill set, and if you are comfortable that you have got somebody that can listen in, and that employees will still be completely honest and open. If not, then get an external in, somebody like me, or another D&I consultant, or whoever it might be, a comms facilitator or whatever, to come in, run some focus groups to try to really get to the root cause of what's going on. If you are trying to attract a particular group that you don't have any representation of already, you might want to get an external focus group. So, if, for example, you are, say, an engineering company and you're wanting to attract more women into your organization, and you currently have zero, right? You have zero women, and you're not even getting women applying to your jobs. You might actually maybe want to do a focus group of, say, graduates, so graduate women, and sort of ask them, um, what is it about our company that doesn't appeal to you? What sorts of companies do appeal to you? So that's one way of kind of getting to some of the root causes. And then when you're then setting the targets, you're setting the targets based on the things that you know you need to do that will make a difference. Okay. So let's get on to the employee pipeline. So here we're talking about, if we're just talking about diversity and representation, I always say, especially for companies that are just starting out at this, and maybe their diversity, isn't generally very good, so their workforce is quite homogenous. I always say, look at the pipeline and start. Think about it as a funnel. And at the top of the funnel, you've kind of got, people are hired and they come into the top of the funnel. And actually, even before the funnel, you've kind of got attraction to us as an organization. And what you need to do is you really need to look at the funnel all the way along to see, where are we losing people? Where are we not just getting that broad representation of, the communities that we serve, of the UK, of our global regions, etc. Where are we losing the diversity? You start really with attraction. And I always say, if you currently have no diversity measures in place at all, don't necessarily start at the board level, unless obviously you're FTSE 350 and you have to, right? But if you're a large enough organization, so, if you've got more than, say, 150 employees, you're big enough to kind of start to be representative of the communities that you serve. You've got enough of a critical mass. And I always say, start with attraction. So, when we put a job ad out, when we go to market, we're trying to recruit and hire. Do we get applications from a really broad and diverse set of people? Because if we don't, that's the first red flag. And you're never going to get this diverse sort of like pipeline, or this diverse workforce, if you're not even able to attract a diverse pool of candidates. So I always say that's the first place to start, and that's maybe a good measure. So your first target might be, for every role that we put out, particularly if it's entry level, right? Because that there should, in theory, be less structural barriers. So for every entry level role, we want to make sure that we get a candidate pool, a pool of applicants that reflects, the local community of where that job is located. And that's a really good target to start off with. And then as you go through the pipeline, you can then look at, okay, so when we're then hiring, what comes through the interview and selection process? And again, if you start to see that you start to lose diversity, what you can do is you can start to put some measures in place to make sure that there is no bias that's creeping in. So you're looking for, where is the pipeline starting to leak? Where do we leak diversity? And if we're leaking it, is it because there is bias in some of the processes, whether that be the hiring processes, the promotion processes, or is it that there is some structural issue? So maybe, is there a barrier to people coming in externally, or a barrier to people being promoted, and why is that? Again, so those are some of the things that you're looking for. But basically, you can set your targets anywhere along that pipeline, but you have to understand the root causes and where you're actually leaking. And as I say, you want to be starting from the top of the funnel all the way through, ideally, rather than just starting almost like kind of like randomly at the end, saying, oh, we want our board to be sort of X, Y, and Z. So that's it really in terms of the employee pipeline. When it comes to inclusion and belonging, one reason why it's useful to look at the employee pipeline, what some organizations notice is that they have really good representation at the bottom of the organization. But at the top, it's homogenous, and typically, for many organizations at the top, it's all male, it's still kind of like all the same ethnicity or the same race. It's straight. There's nobody with a disability, etc. So again, you've got to that's why it's really useful to look at it in terms of a pipeline. Why is it that we're not progressing people in the same proportion as the representation that we've got lower down in the organisation? Okay. And so then getting on to outcomes and results, because at the end of the day, and this goes back to the moral case, but also the business case. We don't want to just be like doing lots of activities, getting D&I consultants into the organisation, things like this, investing lots of time and money and resource, and asking employees to do all of this work on the side of their desks. And we've got affinity networks and diversity councils, and then we get no results, right? So, how do you measure the results? And this kind of links to the target setting, but almost like at a strategic level. What are you expecting to see as an organization? What are the results that you're expecting to see? What is that return on investment for all of this time, all of this effort, all of this measurement, all of that sort of stuff? And so, at a really sort of like high level, kind of 30,000 foot level, some of the things that are usually measured, I guess, across industries and sectors and different organizations. I'm going to start with innovation because there are quite a few interesting surveys and pieces of research. And we know when people talk about the business case for, diversity and inclusion in particular, people talk about things like innovation, creativity. So what some studies have done in the past, so people like Boston Consulting Group and some others, they've looked at innovation as a measure of how well you're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. And innovation as measured by, the number of new products and services that we've actually delivered. And, either the number of new products and services or the revenues coming from new products and services, right, as a measure of innovation. So I'm getting quite, sort of like commercial. I'm putting my accountant's hat on and bringing that, because at the end of the day, as well as this just being the right thing to do, it is good for business. So why not try to measure that as an organization? So innovation revenues, new products, new services, new processes as well. So actually, have we come up with better ways of, for example, serving customers, better ways of dealing with stakeholders? And then, in terms of our employees and our customers, are our employees happier? Are employees, referring us as an employer to more of their friends and family, etc.? So net promoter, our employees starting to promote us. And the same with customers, are customers happier? So if, for example, if one of your reasons for increasing diversity was to match the demographic of your customers, are you now able to measure, are our customers happier? Are we able to measure that? What is the net promoter score looking like for customers? So those are some of the things that you can start to measure almost like at that higher level to make sure that, all of this diversity target setting and measuring and all of that stuff is actually, sort of like bearing fruit. And then finally, in the last few minutes, the backlash. So this quote, I found this quote from a Forbes article, and it says, when a company announces diversity targets, white men here, we will discriminate against you and reduce your ranks. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in sessions with clients about, diversity and inclusion, and maybe they're quite early on their journey. And typically somebody on the board will say, well, I know somebody who works at a large organization, and I'm not going to quote any of the organizations, but they'll say that person has basically been told that because you are white and male, you're not being promoted. And I don't know how true that is. I mean, I do know that obviously here in the UK, we had the case of the RAF, so the Royal Air Force had a diversity drive, and it was found to have, or there were suggestions. I'm not sure how that case has been concluded, but certainly it was being reported in the press that they had discriminated against 160 white men, right? So there is something about a backlash, even just by issuing diversity targets. You may well get a backlash. You may well get some internal resistance. You may well get, a drop in employee engagement scores from the existing majority, if that is, for example, as I put there, straight white men. Reality is they might think this isn't for me and I'm not going to benefit from it. One of the things that I always say, diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging isn't just about diversity. It is also about everyone, and I mean everyone, including straight white men, being able to bring themselves to work and do their best work and be rewarded for that. Okay. So it's really important to make sure that your targets reflect inclusion, as well as diversity, right? So that we're not just, we're not excluding one group in how we actually go about this. So that's the first thing. So make sure that your targets include inclusion, and belonging, as well as diversity. And then in terms of avoiding reverse discrimination, thinking about, okay, what is it that are straight white men, if you want to sort of like identify that as a group, what is it that that group needs? So it may be that we know that because of how things are skewed. So if you're in an organization where the board is already predominantly male and white in terms of ethnicity, we know that there will already be a slight tendency to promote and hire people that are already in that image. So it's recognizing there is already a skew in terms of that, in terms of promotion and progression. But that group also needs other things in terms of inclusion, right? And things like, sort of talking about things like health, mental health, etc. So do you need a target around that? Do you need a target around men's well-being, men's emotional health, something that makes that group understand that we actually do care about what their needs are is really important. And that kind of all like links into this sense of fairness. So the one thing I wanted to talk about actually before I move on, positive discrimination. So where somebody is specifically hired or promoted just because of an identity, just because they are female, just because they are of an ethnic minority, just because they have a disability, is generally illegal. And if not illegal, it's frowned upon, right? Depending on what country you're in. But generally, it's illegal, right? Positive discrimination is illegal. Even in the States, I know that affirmative action is going through a whole kind of like series of changes. Positive action is not illegal. And sometimes these things get a little bit confused. And also, there is a little bit of quite complicated legislation that I won't go into today. And I can't even remember the section number. I might put it in the comments if I remember. Positive action might look something like this. So when it comes to, say, management consulting, I think a lot of people have heard of the infamous case study. So, for example, with something like McKinsey, everybody's heard of, there is this part of the process for hiring which is called the case study. It's notorious. Lots of the best business schools in the world, sort of like tutor and coach their graduates on how to pass these case studies. So if you've been to some of the top business schools in the world, you will have an advantage in terms of how to pass these case studies. Obviously, if you haven't been, then you've kind of got a disadvantage because you haven't been coached. So what some of those organizations are doing is they're starting to, as part of the hiring process, they are effectively offering more support to prepare individuals from certain backgrounds to be able to pass the case study, right? They're not lowering the standards, they're not doing any of that. They're just kind of giving additional sort of like prep support and saying, do these exercises online or whatever it might be, and you will then be better prepared to take the case. So that's an example of positive action rather than positive discrimination. So hopefully that helps. But that's it. That's all I wanted to cover. How to set diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging targets. If it's something that you're working on in your organization and you need extra help, please do reach out to me and I will see what I can do. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining. Best of luck if you are currently setting targets. If you've got some targets set and you don't know if they're necessarily working, kind of go back through these slides and see whether there are any tips that you can pick up on. But that's it for today. If you're in the UK, if you're watching this on a Friday, have a great weekend and take it easy. See you guys. Bye. See you next time.